It's Bigfoot Collectors Club with Bryce, Michael, and Ivy. I know a story of high strangeness or two. Let's do this.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Bigfoot Collectors Club, the show where we talk to amazing guests about their personal paranormal history and share stories of high strangeness. I am your host, Michael McMillan. With me always is your other host,
Bryce Johnson.
And our super producer,
Riley Bray.
He's back, but he's sort of not back.
I'm back, but
He's
for
back,
some reason
baby.
the internet's real bad, so I don't talk a lot in this episode. But just so you guys know, I am here and I'm fascinated.
I just pictured you. We're in the time machine, everybody. It's fine. I just pictured you when we were chatting with today's guests, just you taking a little nap under your desk, George Costanza style.
It's been a long day, it's fine.
Yeah. Well, this is one of our expert episodes. This is when we bring in people who know a lot more about these subjects than we do. And we have a doozy of a subject and some really cool experts this week. We have two of the filmmakers behind the new documentary called Ariel Phenomenon, which is all about the area school encounter. We're going to get all into it. It's a big mass close encounter sighting. A really cool documentary. If you want to watch that first, go ahead and check it out. But if you haven't seen it, this conversation is it's very much about the event itself. So it doesn't ruin the documentary, and also you won't be lost in this conversation if you haven't heard it. So we're talking with the director, Randall Nickerson, and Rebecca Rideout, who's associate producer, and as we talk about, a fellow club
and
scout.
who's also a club scout and Patreon.
Yeah.
So
And
that's
Cosmeteer.
amazing. A Cosmeteer,
and a
I
Cosmeteer.
love that.
There you go. We love it.
That's
Speaking
cool.
of the Patreon, Riley, you weren't here as we were closing out last week's episode, and we queued up. Now, I believe it's dropped. If it hasn't, it's going to within a matter of days. But we finally looked to see what was going on in the bathroom of your home and see if we could. Do you want to tell our listeners who are not familiar with the other side what we did for this special Patreon episode?
Okay, here's the setup, everyone. So multiple people separate from each other have told me that they sensed something in the bathroom at my house. Someone referred to it as a weight. Someone referred to it as feeling like they were like a heavy blanket was put over them when they walked in. Adela just straight up said, there's ghosts in your bathroom, right?
Yeah, Adela looked fine.
Or I think she said a ghost. So it's happened enough times and I've ignored it for long enough that I was like, all right, you know what? We're going to get to the bottom of this. So we called in two of our experts with very different approaches. We had Adela, who comes in with a more intuitive approach. And then we had
Linda the Ghost Hunter.
Yep,
Sorry,
exactly.
I'm
Linda
so
the Ghost
excited.
Hunter. I know you're so excited. We're very excited. Linda the Ghost Hunter comes in with her tech and her tools and everything, and we had them each independently go in and check out the space and do what they do. And then we had a nice roundtable discussion about the whole thing. And I will tell you, if you've been waiting to join the Patreon, this is the moment.
Yeah, guys, it's a double-blind ghost test with two experts who agreed to do it. They were like, we'll pit each other against each other. Sure, let's go.
It's a different format of a audio episode than here, so it really does kind of work better on the other side. But I will say, and I don't want to get into any spoilers or what's happened since, but I have not stopped thinking about that night. That was a pretty fucking cool night.
Yeah, it really was. Man. The night did not disappoint. I hope the episode does not either. I don't think it does.
Yeah.
And if you want to know more, check it out. Patreon.com/Patreon.
Yeah. Bigfoot Collectors Club.
So good. It feels like, we're getting into some new territory as the BCC boys. And you know what? I don't mind it.
Yeah, in the last 6 months,
we're entering our Scooby-Doo era, really.
Yeah, in the last 6 months, we went on a Bigfoot hunt and a ghost hunt, and we only lost the audio for one of those.
Well, this one we're calling a ghost expedition because we weren't hunting for the ghost.
I think it was a ghost quest.
Ghost Quest.
Ghost Quest.
That's it. Ghost Quest. Yes,
it was a ghost quest. That's right. We don't want to hurt any
Which
ghosts.
sounds like an 80s arcade game, which
totally.
Ghost Quest.
All right, let's get into this week's episode because we have a lot to talk about things that are not ghosts, although maybe they could be. Who even knows with this high strangeness stuff? All right, here's our conversation with the team behind Ariel Phenomenon. All right, Club Scouts, get ready because we have two, I'm going to say, experts on a subject that is a bottomless well of fascination for me. I know it is for Bryce and Riley as well. They are part of the filmmaking team behind the new documentary about a 1994 mass close encounter called Ariel Phenomenon, which is available to see now on multiple streaming platforms. Club Scouts of all timelines, please welcome associate producer and fellow Club Scout Rebecca Rideout and director Randall Nickerson.
Woo! Thanks for having us
on.
Oh man,
it's
we
our
are
pleasure.
So excited. You two have stayed up very late on the East Coast, so you can join us here on the West Coast. I mean, I don't even know where to begin with the whole Ariel thing. I know Bryce has a bunch of questions lined up as well. But why don't we start with welcoming Rebecca, who is a official Club Scout.
And a Patreon.
Longtime Patreon listener of the show. It's so exciting to have someone who's been listening who is also involved with the phenomenon itself in a much more artistic and formal way than we are. How did Rebecca, how did you get into this subject and how did you find Randall and team up with him for this project?
Great question. Thanks for having me, first of all. Well, Randall and I met at a networking event. I've been doing video production since, high school, making many videos about ghosts and the phenomenon in general. But have a video production company and met Randall at a networking event out for the Berkshire Film and Media Collaborative, I think they're called. So we had to write our names on our name tags and our favorite films. But something got into me that night. I didn't want to write some sort of like highbrow film. I wanted to think of one that I'd loved as a kid and as an adolescent. So I wrote Contact. And as I manifested, I guess, meeting each other. Neither of us, do you remember meeting Randall? I don't quite remember meeting that night or what you had on your name tag.
Well, I had the movie, I spelt it wrong. It was called Jupiter Ascending, and I put Jupiter Rising. It was one of my favorite movies at the time. It's still a really excellent film concept. Anyway, but it was interesting, and when I met Rebecca, I was starting to really look for crew, more so. And I had her name on my wall for like a year before I finally called you and said, hey, would you be interested? And we met for lunch, and it was really cool how it happened. And it's been a wonderful working relationship. It's been awesome.
And so, Randall, you were looking to crew up for this project, Ariel Phenomenon, at that time?
Yeah, because I'd been working on it alone for a long time. And I kind of got stuck when I got into post-production and did several versions myself of the movie. And then was like, okay, I need help.
You're like, I need to find someone who has an exclusive production company all about filming ghosts.
Well,
it was Ann first. She started to help me, and then Chris Seward, who I needed somebody to help me tell the story well, and then Rebecca, and then Rick. DeGrasse came on, and we all kind of worked together. And
when I came on, he said, come over and watch some movies about aliens at my house. I was a little hesitant, but eventually I did it.
They're all like home movies.
What movies were you watching
I came to his house and he sat me down and I watched all of the raw interviews from the adult students from Ariel School. Wow. And that was certainly a paradigm shift day for me. I mean, I hadn't been involved with ufology at all. And I walked out of this house that day and I just didn't know what to make of it because they're not bullshitting. They're completely authentic throughout the entire interview. They're obviously affected by it, and I couldn't explain it. So 6 years later, I'm still involved because I still can't explain what the heck they saw, but I definitely believe them.
And I think this is the perfect segue into this case. For those who are listening who are not familiar, and by the way, we covered, the Cliff's Notes version of this back in, I think, what was it, episode 33, 38, Bryce?
It was early. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It was a while back. Let's let our listeners know, Randall, for those who are not familiar with the Ariel School phenomenon, can you give us a brief description as to what supposedly took place?
Sure. 1994, September 16th, rural farm community and school in Zimbabwe. And they were out on recess in the morning, these children, a whole bunch of them. And they reported seeing this thing in the sky first, going across the sky. And then all of a sudden that thing was on the ground about 150, 200 yards from the edge of the playground. And actually that distance seems much closer now when you go there. So all the kids say, God, it wasn't that far away. But they saw these things getting out of this object and really bright lights, very shiny. And then one of these, at least one, because there was multiple accounts, but at least one of them approached very closely to the group of kids that were gathering at the playground.
Wow.
Then the kids were asked to do, the teachers didn't believe them. Nobody believed them when they came screaming in to a staff meeting. And one of the parents, the kids went home and told their parents, and the parents called the school. They were irate, like, what'd you do to our kids?
Yeah.
And the parents got in touch with the BBC reporter. He showed up on the Monday following and started interviewing these kids. And that's kind of how
Ted Leach? Is it Tim Leach?
Tim Leach, I believe.
Yeah. And they had the kids do drawings. That's kind of, and then there was interview after interview after that. And then Dr. John Mack from Harvard came out there and interviewed them as well.
And we're going to get into some of these details and what happened in the days that follow. But can you briefly describe what these entities that came out of the ship looked like, according to the kids?
According to the kids, they were about the same size as them. A sixth grader actually referred to that. Several of the kids noted their heights, that they were small. They were not that big, but their heads were enormous in comparison to their bodies. They were wearing some kind of extremely tight, very shiny bodysuit. That's how the kids describe it. It was black. Their eyes were black, very large, wrapped around the side of their head. Nose and mouth were extremely small in comparison. The way they moved was odd, like, multiple reports of them not really walking like they were in the Earth's gravity. And also some kind of just manipulation of time that was experienced. And it's amazing to hear kids try to talk about this, but some form of telepathy, which the kids were like, somehow it was in my consciousness. They didn't even know that word, but they knew that something was communicated between these. Yeah,
one of the little girl goes, "It was my conscience talking to me, my conscience," which was like, I was like, that's actually a great way if you're a kid and you don't understand telepathy, or because we all have that inner voice and we're all aware of it as a child, and it made me go, well, maybe that's what telepathy sounds like. Maybe it sounds like the voice we hear in our heads, but taken away and written by somebody else, I guess.
That's great. That's Randall.
I want to jump in here because I think something else that was really interesting is a lot of the community in and around Zimbabwe had seen objects in the sky a few nights prior. And as a matter of fact, there was a MUFON investigator, Cynthia Hind, who wrote a case about it, where she says, a pyrotechnic display of some magnificence appeared in the almost clear night skies of this part of the continent. And she goes on to say that multiple witnesses, including scientists, astronomers, and even 3 pilots, had come forward to say that they saw these. What do you think the parallel or the significance is going on here, that this took place 2 nights prior, and then 2 days later, we have this landing at a schoolyard?
Mm-hmm. Well, it was going on for about a week, these sightings from all over the country, including other countries. So it was happening a couple days before, the night before. That's where I kind of focused a lot more of my energy and research, was what happened the night before. Yeah. And then even the day after, the day and evening after, there were sightings of these, flying, floating discs, or whatever you want to call them.
Interesting.
And people saw them, very low to the ground, changing direction. People had them over their head. I mean, there's hundreds of witnesses to this that I couldn't even interview all the other witnesses around this event. This seemed to be like the pinnacle of the event, unless I missed something.
I was just going to say, Randall went for 2 different times before going back with the crew, with the student that gets followed, and spent months there, right? I mean, basically lived in Africa.
I lived there for a year and 3 months.
Wow.
Tracking people down and tracking the archival footage down, because I found out there was so much more. It's like, oh, that's important.
I could not believe how much video and original archival footage you guys had access to. Talk to us about, I want to hear a little bit more about the area itself and how the area has been affected, because we get into some of the kids and obviously who are now all grown up, but how did you find this community still affected by this event? And then how did you figure out how to find some of this stuff that you guys used?
Yeah, there's a lot of archival sources to be licensed and researched. So that was a huge part of it. But yeah, I mean, Tim Leach, the BBC reporter that was the first on the scene, I don't think anybody knew he existed, and Randall found him. And he's the one that shot all of the first footage of the kids on scene. So,
and he was a war correspondent who came in somewhat skeptical, right? I mean, he was like, okay, let's get to the bottom of this. What kind of airplanes were you guys seeing? And he had a profound experience of a paradigm shift as well, it sounds like.
Yeah, it still blows his, he passed away, unfortunately, but, up to the last days of his life, he was like, it just blew my mind. Still blew his mind.
You can see it in his face in those interviews where he's just, he looks like a man who is bewildered and trying to put it all together.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's a point is like, in 1994, I don't know if it was in the zeitgeist as much as it is today. So, and especially in a place like Zimbabwe, this must have felt all new to the entire community. Did you guys get a sense of that? Or did people have a feeling of, I mean, obviously the UFO and alien topic wasn't on the tip of people's tongues around that time, was it?
No. I feel like, they're still talking about it. I mean, it's never left. Everybody knows about it, around. We ran into people in Botswana and other countries that you mean the alien thing, that Ariel, like people knew about it. Strangers knew about that happening because it did make its rounds in Africa.
I think it varied with the student body, if they had access to TV or not. I think most didn't. I think some of the more wealthy families did, but I think most of the students had never watched those kind of programs before.
Kids didn't have any access.
And global media was so different than, I think we forget, but, X-Files, I think, was airing here, but that was back in the day where, like, even predominantly English-speaking countries like, Great Britain, like, wouldn't get Friends until, like, 2 or 3 years later, you know what I mean? So now, today with Netflix, some things that hit everywhere all at once, but...
No, I think it was Emily who's in the film that said they would get VHS tapes of American TV shows like a year after they came off. Their families would mail them to them from Canada or the US.
Mostly cartoons and stuff like that, not really alien stuff.
Right.
Yeah,
You know?
and a lot of families that seem to be, at least a couple that were pretty Christian and seem to not be open to these ideas to begin with, because they sort of contradict lessons they're learning from the Bible.
Correct. Yeah, there was a variety of different interpretations, depending on whether it was a Shona, the kids were from the Shona village. That's more like animism. And so and ancestors, real heavy focus on these are our ancestors. And then you have that all the way through. Some Muslim people were there. There were, you name it, every religion was really represented at that school.
And the missionaries.
And then you had the Christian element. It was a Christian school, but they were very accepting of, because it was such a mixed population. Actually,
that's what's so cool watching the movies. You're like, there's so many different kids representing so many different cultures here. It really is a melting pot. And if there was a purpose behind this landing, and I'm not so sure there was, you know what I mean? I don't know. It almost felt accidental.
I think there was
to me, but
it's an important clue, though, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. But what better place than to be like, okay, there are a bunch of different kids from a bunch of different cultures here, racially mixed. This is a good place to like, and I love that they go to the kids instead of the adults. And it almost feels strange. Did you guys pick up any sense of there being anything weird about the fact, or was it just coincidence that none of the adults, for whatever reason, were on the playground that day? That they all just happened to be in this meeting?
I mean, what are the odds?
It's definitely weird. Well, I think it happened fairly often, though. The sense I get. What do you think?
Well,
Randall?
there was one person who was one of the teachers who was in the tuck shop, right? The curio shop. They would never leave them out there without an adult.
It was a snack shop.
So she was out there. Yeah, she was like in a little snack shop, but she couldn't see anything from her position.
Right.
And the window was way tucked into the building. And, I did an overhead map of like, all right, who could have seen this from what vantage point? And it's like, it's like the perfect spot. No adult could see it from their point of view. Which, except for the first grade teacher, which is a whole nother story that's not in the movie, because she had the optimal viewpoint of this, and she was in charge of the younger kids. So yeah, there's a lot more to this story that didn't make the film, but that does interest me a lot. They were having a meeting about wages, their pay for the next year. That was the meeting going on, and then you had the older kids, the 6th, 7th graders, who were prefects, so they were in charge of. They were really in charge. That's when, if there was not enough adults, there's always usually 2 adults on that playground. There was only 1. So the prefects had a job, and they were brought into this by the younger kids and didn't believe the younger kids, until they saw it themselves.
Wow.
So it's just fascinating, but it's good to raise questions about it. That's for sure.
Michael, this sounds like the perfect recess for you, like a dream come true recess.
It's crazy. I don't want to make this about myself, but when I was in 2nd or 3rd grade, I remember having this and I grew up in the 80s, but I had this really creepy nightmare that a bunch of little gnomish, like gnome people, visited our playground in these little like Shriner cars and clown cars and showed up. And they were all wearing like David the Gnome style pointed hats. And it terrified me. And years later, when I heard this story, I was like, wait, that reminds me of that dream I had where these like little alien like fairy creatures visit us on the playground. So there's something archetypal about this, I feel like, underneath. Rebecca, when you were watching this footage, when you came over and watched this hours of footage, what describe the process that you went through hearing all this stuff.
I mean, your first take is just thinking about, unsolved mysteries and the stereotypical alien gray. And then to hear the kids over and over describing it, or the adults now describing it the same way. And these are people, I just want to say, that are whole people. You know, it's not like this has defined their life. They're my age, actually. The oldest kids on the playground are your and are my age, and they grew up. They have jobs. They have families, and they're sitting here in front of this camera, saying something completely unrelatable for me. So, yeah, thinking about if it could be true. I guess that's where your brain goes. If it could be true, what does that mean? I mean, and that just sort of, it took about a year or two to come to terms with, wow, well, if that means what I think it means, my entire worldview is shifted, you know?
Of all the UFO cases, I mean, that are on the books, I mean, this one sort of rings of an authenticity, almost like none other that do, just because of the amount of people. I mean, this is a mass close encounter of the third kind. And, you know, these kids weren't, you know, you can't come to the conclusion that these kids were making this story up. At least John Mack came to that conclusion. And so it just has this sort of freshness and authenticity that almost no other case does. It stands at a pinnacle for maybe what's taking place. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't seek fame from it. They didn't make money on it, and they didn't ask for it. So it's a mystery. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, I think the thing that really struck me when I was watching the archival, because it was time after time, whether the kid was close to the edge of the playground or he was in another position or she was in another position, they were describing it from their point of view. And when they were being interviewed, they weren't checking in or looking around at the other kids like, do we got the right story? You know, they were telling it from their own personal viewpoint. And that was consistent throughout. I mean, there's so many more interviews that aren't in the movie, but they're stunning when you look at them all over time. You know, they were interviewed right away, then a week later, then another week later, then a couple months later, and then 6 months later, then a year later, or 3 years later. So you have this sort of consistency in time. The stories never change. And it's told from first person perspective, you know, which is one of the reasons why the movie is like not from anybody. It's from all their mouths. It's not, there's no third person or second person witness there. It's all first.
I really liked the fact that I felt like, and this doesn't always happen with documentaries about UFO subjects, and I felt like you guys did, and Randall, you particularly got out of the way of the subject and just presented the story, and in a way that was very giving to the people who experienced this, but also I didn't feel like you guys were pushing us as the audience to believe any of it, you know? And I'm curious, echoing a little bit of what Rebecca was describing a few minutes ago, when, for both of you individually, when was the moment watching this footage that you went, okay, I think my mind is changing? Was there a particular moment when you're like, okay, they got me. I think this happened?
I mean, it's pretty heavy. Like, you don't really want it to be true. So first of all, I just want to make that clear. I show this to friends and family, and they start just talking about all this as if it's real. And I'm like, no. I mean, maybe it's not. I'm not trying to make people believe it. So I just want to put that out there. It's a pretty heavy topic. And I feel like I start watching the film every time not believing it. And every time I see the film, by about, a quarter, half the way through, I start going, oh, shit. Shit. I believe it again. So yeah, it happens to me every time, but I can't pinpoint a certain moment beyond just watching those raw interviews and then all of the archival footage as I got more involved with it. What about you, Randall?
Yeah. Were you ever skeptical, Randall, or did you?
Yeah, I had to be. Yeah, I mean, I was really interested in like who doesn't believe this and what's their reasoning, that was there, and interviewed those people. And one of the guys, one of the teachers, he had changed his mind, by the time I got to him. And I said, well, you were pretty adamant back then. And he said, he says, what changed your mind? I asked him, and he said the consistency over time. They've never changed their story. And damn, I was waiting. I needed a, I needed a skeptic.
Yeah.
So I went to two astronomers who were also witness to things and that they couldn't explain. But they were very skeptical about it being aliens or anything that happened at Ariel, which I understand. And when, Strategic Air Command or Airborne, when they heard that it was, the officials put out that it was a meteorite at first, and then a Russian rocket reentry. They nobody looked into it after that point because they took it as, oh, that's what it was.
Right.
But I think the thing that shifted me was the archival. When I started to get even more in, I was like, let's see, and it just was more confirmatory. And then it was interviewing the pilots. That's kind of really what I started interviewing people that were doctors who had seen this thing, adults outside of Ariel the night before and in the morning of Ariel. And the pilot, after I met with the pilot and he told me what he saw, and he was with two other pilots, another aircraft and his co-pilot. And there were more pilots up there, the ones that Cynthia had in her book. But yeah, after hearing what he witnessed up there, that was because, I don't know. I think he's got 25,000 hours up there. Really good man, good pilot. He, no reason to report it whatsoever.
What did he describe?
He described seeing this ball of light off his wingtip at 25,000 feet. And he had another aircraft coming up on his right side to formate on him. Believe it or not, in Africa, like airliners will fly in formation sometimes because they know each other, and we wouldn't see that over here. But and he thought it was that aircraft coming up on that side, and he asked him, "Is that you on that side?" And he said, "No, I'm on your other side." And he said, "Well, what the heck is that?" And they all saw it just like cross right in front of them and disappear over the horizon within 2 or 4 seconds. So, and it was at their altitude. And so to do that, because when you're at 25,000 feet, you can see that horizon. That's a long ways away, and for something to disappear like that quickly, it was, he's never forgotten it.
And he tries to debunk
nobody
it.
ever
He
does.
says, like, was it a reflection? But no, because someone else, the other pilot and the other aircraft saw it, so it couldn't have been a reflection on the windshield. It couldn't have been ball lightning. He talks about all the phenomena that they do see up there. Those pilots see all kinds of stuff, satellite reentries, and meteorites, and St. Elmo's fire on the windshield. Called, right?
All kinds of different things, ball lightning. But this was not any of those things. And anyway, that was kind of a big shift for me. Was the weight of all of it. It wasn't just the kids. It wasn't just a few people. There was quite a bit. And somebody, Johannesburg had it on their radar. Because the pilot, when he landed, he went up to the tower to say, "Hey, have you seen anything on your radar?" Because something came by us. And it was ridiculous. And he said, "Yeah, we did actually see something on the edge of our radar, but it was moving so quickly, we couldn't get any idea on it at all."
They just thought it was
I gotta ask, do you guys assume, or maybe that's a bad word, but do you guys think that this thing that these pilots saw is the same craft or light vehicle that landed at the school?
Don't know.
Don't know. The timing's really, the pilots that night before, and then you have one of the neighbors at Ariel seeing it in the morning around 6 o'clock in the morning. It does make me wonder. You also have another radar controller from South America the night before also, who viewed this bizarre thing that was changing altitude. Went from a very high altitude to an extremely low altitude in a very short period of time. And that's what caught their attention. So, all I can judge from that is something was happening in those skies that was unusual. And Ariel kind of connects all those dots. Like, as far as I know, this thing didn't, come on the ground in any other place. I don't know, but
Yeah.
So weird. We have to take a very quick break. I don't want to stop the momentum of this conversation, but we got to take a quick break. When we come back, we have a lot more to talk about, including, I know Bryce wants to get to him, John E. Mack and his involvement in the case. All right, we're back. We're speaking with Randall Nickerson and Rebecca Rideout from the film Ariel Phenomenon. Rebecca, right before we went to break, we were talking about stuff being up in the skies at night. And I think I cut you off.
Yeah, I was just about to say, as you can see, there's a lot of extra footage that didn't make the film. I mean, there's hundreds of hours of footage. Where do you make these decisions? So you can hear the pilot, one line from his interview at the beginning of the film. But of course, we have that interview, and the weaving of all of the archival footage that we had. We wanted the event to sort of unfold in real time, in order of how the investigators appeared, and it does. But we had to jump back and forth between that and current day interviews with the students, and then weaving together, as we're going to talk about, Dr. John Mack, Tim Leach, and Ariel student Emily Trim. So that was the challenge, and a lot of things ended up on the cutting room floor. I mean, it's wild how much footage there is.
It's a big story. This could be a mini-series, honestly.
Yeah,
but I felt you guys did a really good job of getting it into 100 minutes. So it's not even a long movie, and the most fascinating stuff too, I think, also hinges on finding those adults now who were the children and seeing where they are in their lives now and seeing how they remember it. There's that great
trauma
scene.
Induced. Yeah.
Yeah. The trauma, the wonder, all of it, because it seems to have impacted everybody differently as well. I guess that's a good segue into John Mack's role into it. Bryce, did you want to cue up anything about Johnny Mack?
Well, sure. I mean, I guess from what I understand is it was Tim who reached out to Dr. John Mack, who was the head of psychiatry at Harvard and who was introduced to the UFO topic and phenomena through his friend, Bud Hopkins. But this is really like bringing in a heavy hitter. And I even think, when John Mack kind of arrived on the scene, he was like, well, I've never dealt with something like this before, but he just dove right in. And can you talk to us a little bit about maybe what he brought to the table that nobody else was?
Yeah. So, I mean, John Mack, he brought in the fact that he was, had worked with kids for 20 years. I mean, as a clinician. And, of course, the man has accolades. You just go on Harvard's website. You can see who that man was. But he brought in, he was very curious about the subject matter. And Bud Hopkins had introduced him to several people who had encounters. And John Mack put them through a bunch of psychological tests and questioned them, met with them, and came to the conclusion, posited, I guess that's the proper word, where he said, these people are talking about something real that happened to them. They're not taught. This isn't psychosis. This isn't, he went down the list of all the things that he was very familiar with. And then he started to travel to other countries to see if this was just a United States thing, Wow. So he went to South America, and then he took that trip to Africa. Tim Leach, the BBC war reporter, had called him on that Friday. Believe it or not, that the message is in the movie. That's the actual message. He calls Dr. Mack. Thank God people save things. He calls him and says, look, man, this just happened. Really would like you to give me a call. Don't know what to do here. I'm a little out of my league, And somebody had given his number, like, this guy is really like top notch and he's looking into these kind of things. And then John Mack was over there December 1st.
It was sometime after, but
about 3 months. Yeah. Since because the incident happened in what, September?
Yep. September 16th. Yeah.
So the thing that's really interesting, and I knew a little bit about this because of what Bryce had shared on the episodes before with John Mack, and you really get a sense of it in the film, is like how hard Harvard threw him under the bus once he started talking about this stuff. And there's that archival footage of that other Harvard professor who's like, oh, John's gone off the deep end. And it made me so mad, you know what I mean? Watching that. But I wondered, I guess, because there was never a moment in the film where John, in the archival footage, obviously, since he passed, you didn't get to interview him directly, sadly, but there never seems to be a moment where he comes right out and says, I think these are aliens. He just supports the notion of like, something's happening to these people and it's worth figuring out what it is because it's clearly part of the human experience. Did he ever, to our knowledge, come out I'm okay with it if he did, but did he ever come out and be like, aliens are real? They're really, they're really, landing here. Where did he end up with all this stuff?
I don't know because I haven't read his books, so I'm going to let Randall answer that.
Fair enough.
Fair enough. Honest.
I think he did state a few times earlier on. I think that he thought that whatever they're experiencing was real, and his sort of statement was, "What it is, that's what we can debate, right?" And I think after the Harvard whole craziness, when Harvard went after him, I think he became much more careful of how he spoke about this, in my opinion. But I like his point. Like, yeah, I cannot clinically explain this. A lot of people can't. So what is it? Are we going to just write off, the latest ones? It used to be schizophrenia, believe it or not. These people had schizophrenia, and now it's false memory syndrome. Now it's
I think the guy at the Harvard disciplinary board said, John, if you would have said this is just some unknown psychopathy and not little green aliens, we wouldn't have had a problem.
That's so true.
But
That's
John
true.
was like, bullshit. That's not how it works. And I actually have a quote here from John. He says, quote, I take these accounts seriously. I would never say, yes, there are aliens taking people, but I would say there is a compelling, powerful phenomenon here that I can't account for in any other way that's mysterious. Yet I can't know what it is, but it seems to me that it invites a deeper, further inquiry, which was what he was trying to do. And we so often say there's no scientists and professionals willing to take a look at this. And when they do, we just throw them under the bus. Luckily, Harvard lawyer Alan Dershowitz came to his aid, and they had to back off pretty quickly because he was a tenured professor allowed to study whatever the hell he pleases. But what he
was fighting against in his career was, the religion of science that's sort of like taken over this century, scientism, I guess. And just asking people to step back a little bit from that. And
he's also
change
up
the worldview.
He's also up against the media too, who are, it's great that Oprah has him on and that people are getting exposed to this story, but there is still that stigma in the media as well. And I feel like the media, especially in the 90s, didn't do a great job of helping him make the case. They were like, Harvard professor believes in aliens. You know what I mean? So he's getting it.
Music. Right.
Like, I don't feel like he was trying to brag, but they really made, because that's a headline. You know what I mean?
But
if you've got a show, you're like,
forever, right?
That's a way to spin that story. It's like, wow, we usually point at people who believe in aliens and make fun of them and say they're wearing tinfoil hats. So every headline is playing up that he's a Harvard professor. And I think that didn't help him and didn't help the school embrace him either. So it was just this really shitty system trying to, that's working against him at both ends, I feel like.
It's always
Rebecca,
been the party
I want
line.
piggyback off what you were saying, because I think it's an interesting segue. And I know John Mack felt that there might be a spiritual component to this phenomenon that's taking place. I know in your film, when you speak to some of those elders and the chiefs, they say right there, this is here for a spiritual message from you guys, and it also brings up an interesting point about. Their elder chiefs were buried right just over the overlook of where they took place. Did you guys ever get a sense that there might be some type of spiritual component to this thing that was taking place?
I mean, Randall's got a great interview with one of the spiritual leaders there. Yeah. So I think I definitely think it's part of the culture there to believe in more things than we can see more readily than our culture does.
And not necessarily jump to, they're aliens from outer space.
Yeah, I mean, Randall, you've watched the interview that I'm referring to more often, so you'd know more about what he says. But I mean, it seems like it almost hardly surprises them that this happened.
That's true. I interviewed several chiefs, and one of the most interesting one was Credo Mutwa. He was the the knowledge keeper for the Zulu people, and I didn't know what he was going to say, but John Mack had interviewed him a long time ago, and he had some kind of experience with these things, and he said, because he was running a clinic for people in his village. I went to his village in Kuruman, and he was running a clinic for people that had encountered them. So he had like 7 rooms off of his rondavel for people that had run into these things. And he said, we've known about them for thousands of years. And he said, we used to think they were gods.
Wow.
And he said, we don't anymore, but we used to. And I found that so interesting. Like from somebody that's been entrusted with the history of that tribe, which is no small group of people, that they've come to that, not just him, the other elders have come to that conclusion.
That's wild.
Well, yeah, it's more over here. It's different. People are very, they're just much more open. I find in Africa and other countries, less stigmatism, and I find it even here, like most of the people that have seen stuff just don't say anything. They'll come up to me and say, hey man, I saw something too, but don't say anybody, don't tell anybody.
Right. Cause that stigma that we're talking about. Yeah. It doesn't fit the rational world, the conventional world that we've all decided somebody decided we have to live in. I want to get back to something that we touched on in the first half of the show, because this, and I know, Bryce, you felt the same way, the stuff where they talk about, and the thing that I thought was so interesting is like, you hear the kids try to articulate what these beings were and how they moved. They kept talking about how they moved in slow motion, and the man ran back to the ship and he didn't float or he didn't run. And then as the adults, they're like able to articulate these things a little better. And you really get this awesome sense that these beings were like looping in time almost. Like they were like, we'd see them come up to us, and then this one would run back to the ship, and then all of a sudden he'd be back to where he was, and we'd watch him run back to the ship over and over again, almost like you're skipping, something's buffering or skipping or replaying. And that really captured my imagination.
That's a clue.
Yeah, that really makes me feel like, okay, this is something maybe just overlaying with our reality here that might not even be from this dimension at all. I mean, that's where my mind goes. What was your take on that stuff?
Yeah, those moments that I hadn't and since haven't heard described, that the looping, the slow motion, the woman who describes it looking more natural, like a rock with
the
water
craft
flowing over it, with the sun shining off of it, right? The craft having sort of this more natural look. Things like that I'd never heard before, I've never heard since, are definitely. But they take on, blew my mind.
Yeah, I felt like that to me. I was like, that's real, true high strangeness there. That is this dreamlike. Right? Yeah, this really weird dreamlike quality that people often experience when encountering this stuff. And I can't remember who it was. I think it was one of the adult women who was a child at the time, who was like, when you looked at their face and looked into their eyes, you were getting these, there was a boy as well who talked about looking into the eyes and getting these like almost doomsday messages about us doing a bad job of caretaking the earth. But one of the adult women was saying, if you looked at them, you were sort of transported, but if you looked away, you would come back to reality. But when you looked back at their face and made eye contact with them, suddenly you were almost in this dream world again, or reality, the world of the laws of physics would change. That blew my mind,
Yeah, it's pretty. There's some pretty weird things that they witnessed. Yeah, the in and out of time. There's a lot of little things that they describe as well that are not in the film, but just fascinating.
It's been
Yeah.
interesting listening to the podcast 2 years after starting working on this film and starting to hear all the similarities in high strangeness stories, the timey-wiminess of it all, you know, whether it's Skinwalker Ranch or, I don't know, ghosts that loop. I mean, it definitely, yeah, my mind continues to be blown as I hear high strangeness stories that relate to this one.
For sure. And the sound that they described also caught my attention
Yeah.
to the sound of a flute, or one described it as the humming of bees. You know, in Hinduism, the humming of bees relates to a Kundalini awakening, almost like an altered state of consciousness, as if this vehicle and these entities were able to grab or ascertain this different state of awareness just by either looking into their eyes or through sound cues. But it's
the flute reminds me of the Pied Piper of Hamlet, taking the kids away from the village. They're all following the music away, and it's an abduction story. You know, at the end of the day, a mysterious man comes and takes all the kids. It's of such, that stuff is so mind bending, and that's when I really that's where it just loses me. not the film doesn't lose me, but I lose it. I'm like, I don't know what's happening here. How did you, Randall, like as a director putting together a narrative and you're presented with like, okay, now this stuff is just getting absurd. How do you handle this material, you know, and make sense of it?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. Like, you know, part of it, you know, there's all these short creatures around the world that are in our folklore, you know, leprechauns. And in Africa, it was called the tokolosh, the small creature. People would put their beds, and they still do today, up on cinder blocks so they can raise their bed so the tokolosh can't get them at night.
Oh, boy.
And the tokolosh comes through walls. I mean, it's like, even when I interviewed Credo Mutwa about that, he said, no, the tokolosh is an alien. I was like, okay, that's kind of what I was thinking, but oh my God. Wow. And it does make you think about all the stories, you know, of these things that come in the night and take you away, and how they're usually not very tall. Yeah, there was a lot to, you know, the tokolosh about this small creature in Africa has a reputation. You know, we did like a 20-minute section on just that, you know, and that ended up on the cutting room floor because it's just like,
I'd love to see that.
It's fascinating because there's some connection there, you know, and there's a lot of those things to come up with, you know, really what I felt like, and this was with Chris Seward and everybody on the crew, was I wanted to really tell a movie like you'd tell any other story about something happened to anybody else, right? And luckily, there was so much footage that I had all first person testimony. So that's hard because, you know, that's probably one of the hardest movies to make, is to tell the whole movie from the witnesses' mouths, you know, without interjecting, without doing anything. Let them tell it, you know, and I felt that was like the best way to do it. And there's so many other witnesses to this. You know, there was a cameraman who was a very excellent witness because he works for National Geographic. He was on the scene. He said, I'd never been on something happened there because the wildlife was just not right.
Whoa.
You know?
It's almost like the Phoenix Lights in size of proportion. I mean, this is, you know, what people know about the Phoenix Lights. They're like, oh, just one ship flying over the city, right? No, it was like a parade of like, it was just some cosmic event. Like, it sounds like what happened, you know, in Rua, it was more than just the landing at the school, but some type of significant event that was taking place.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. It It kind of makes you wonder if maybe a craft landed somewhere during the Phoenix Lights incident
does
and
make
interacted
me
with
wonder
somebody,
that
and they
now.
just didn't ever want to tell the story because they didn't want to sound nuts, you know?
Yeah, I mean,
Randall,
it was
you're
a
heading
big
to
deal.
Phoenix.
He's been there. He's been
I actually
there.
went to Phoenix already,
Yeah.
and I went and I talked to the police department.
Yeah.
I was going through Phoenix, and I was like, all right, I got to ask some people about this. And I went to the police department and talked to 2 police officers, and I said, did this happen? They're like, absolutely. I'm like, good enough for me.
Mm.
I didn't want to do a deep dive on it, but I just wanted to get, like, when I went over to the crop circles, check that stuff out. I went to the airport, talked to the instructors, the pilots. I said, is this for real or what? Because I had been there for like a week looking into it, and they're like, yeah, there's something to it. Because, we stop flying at 8, 9 o'clock at night, and we get up in the morning at 6 to fly, and there's 7 of them, all down. It's like, how many people? There'd have to be teams of people doing this, and they're absolutely, they were describing the ones that are done by people and the ones that are absolutely flawless. There's a really big difference. But anyway, so yeah, I do look into that stuff.
And it was, speaking of Phoenix Lights, I mean, it was a big deal at the time. It was covered worldwide. That's how we got so much archival footage, because, many, many countries covered it. And then we all forgot about it again.
It's so crazy. Yeah. It reminds me of the Varginha, Brazil UFO landing as well. And of course, Roswell, the Roswell legend. But the big thing that those 2 incidents have that this one doesn't really seem to have is a large military presence coming in and shutting everything down. I mean,
true.
were there any stories of families being threatened not to talk, or people being told not to share this at all? Or because it seems like it seems as terrifying as it would be for the kids, and I know it must have been for some of them. It seems like an overall fairly peaceful event,
True. I think, Tim Leach shared with me that there were people from the American embassy and the English embassy that paid him a visit. I didn't put it in the film. I didn't want to really get into conspiracy anything, but he would have, maybe I should put that piece of the interview out there at some point where he talks about that. And they wanted a copy of everything, every note he took, every phone call, every recording. And he felt very intimidated by it. And he still, till his death talked about it.
Wow.
Because it bothered him.
Yeah.
And then he went, sorry, Rebecca, I just wanted to, Tim went to the military in Zimbabwe, and they said their radar was down, right? South Africa kind of said the same thing. And then people were reporting there were fighter jets flying really low up and down the valley. There's many reports of that. So there was something going on, but it wasn't, it hasn't been talked about really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think I think all the research happened earlier than when I came on, but it seemed like there are a few things like that are still a little conspiratorial and not proven. So we decided not to put them in.
Well, that's good. That's smart. It's just fascinating that I was like, oh, this case really doesn't have the like knocking on the doors and be like, don't tell anybody what, you know what I mean?
Right.
There's
They're
no,
like, that's why they decided to land there during wage meeting and at recess.
Yeah.
Okay, the military apparatus is pretty low here. All right,
these kids
it's
seem
recess.
Cool.
We got about 3 minutes to do our thing.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I mean, we need to. We could talk about this. We barely scratched the surface, you guys. This movie is so interesting. This case, I think, is endlessly fascinating. I felt like you did such an amazing job assembling this story and especially getting that archival footage out to us, tracking down some of these now adult witnesses, eyewitnesses. There's so many great things about the movie that we didn't even get to. So please tell our listeners where they can find the movie and where they can find you guys and your work. The stage is yours.
Okay. Well, you can follow Ariel Phenomenon at Ariel Phenomenon. It's spelled Ariel because it's the name of the school. Ariel Phenomenon on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. We have a YouTube channel. And you can rent or buy the film on our website. We get a little bit more kickback that way. And you can also find it on iTunes, Amazon Prime Video Direct, Google Play, and YouTube, depending on what country you're in.
I watched it on
website.
Amazon Prime.
Yes.
I bought the movie. I own it now.
Me too.
So,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say Rebecca has been amazingly helpful, in helping this film get completed. There's a lot of people to thank, but I just wanted to point out that she's been very, just amazingly professional and extremely helpful. I hope people will get a chance to see it. It's, I think it's important, in our history, really, on a bigger scale. I think, maybe down the road, our history is going to have to be rewritten a little bit. I wonder.
Yeah, it's going to be weird. Things are only going to get weirder. And I know Club Scouts, I would say this is not recommended viewing. This is required viewing. So go check this out. You guys are going to want to check this movie out for sure. Randall, Rebecca, thank you so much for being on the show. We'll tag all your stuff on Instagram as well, so people will be able to find you. And we'll put a link to the film's website in the show notes for our listeners as well.
Excellent.
Thanks for having us on. Eh? I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for what you guys do and did. It's incredible.
Okay, my dear Club Scouts, before we bid adieu for the week, if you love the show, please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast app. If you write us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, we might. Did somebody say Apple?
No, they didn't.
Get out of here, applesauce.
We might read it on the show. Like these. We're doing 2 this week.
Yeah, because why not? KDH wrote, I love these guys. These dudes are the best. They are truly passionate about all their content and make it so enjoyable to listen to. Each one of these guys brings so much to this show, and their humor seriously gets me through the day. I've been binging this podcast from episode 1 and even listened to it while in labor with my daughter. I'm that addicted. Give it a try. You won't regret it. Thanks, Katie and newborn.
The doctor
that's
held the
cool.
baby and went, this baby's already weird. What happened? What have you been listening to?
Well, I'll add to that Oblivion E46 writes, amazing pod. Found you guys on Distractable, but I've been a believer of High Strangeness since I was very young. Love the energy and connection of you guys and the guests. I have some stories of my own I'll be sending for some L files. Thank you for the content. 5 stars.
Yes.
Ooh, yes.
This is
Send
the
us
type.
those L file
Yes,
stories.
and start having your babies to the sound of our voices. But please do send in your stories to BigfootCollectorsClub@gmail.com. I have to say that we've been getting flooded this past month with amazing stories, and I'm so excited. Club Scouts, y'all are really delivering. Be sure to include the phrase L files in the subject line. It might just be read in a future episode. And look, if you don't, I'll find it, but it just helps me organize everything. Okay, guys? Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Bigfoot Collectors Club, Twitter at Bigfoot Pod, and on TikTok at BCC Pod. It's been a slow burn over there, but I'm working on it. I'm playing around.
We're doing it. Yeah.
We're doing it. We're figuring it out.
You're doing it. Yeah,
I'm doing something.
We're doing it.
Sometimes I'm like, oh, I gotta shower and shave and sit and talk to myself. This is weird. It doesn't seem weird when we're just doing it. I am alone right now in my house, but it somehow feels less strange.
Right.
And also, don't forget to order some merch over at the store at store.bigfootcollectorsclub.com. Finally, if you want more BCC every month and you want to join us on that Ghost Quest, join our Patreon, BCC The Other Side, for 3 additional exclusive episodes every month over at patreon.com/BigfootCollectorsClub. And this is for me. Follow me on McMills on Instagram and hit me up on Cameo for a personalized video from me to you or a loved one. Bryce, what do you got?
Hey, like Rebecca said, follow those Ariel Phenomenon accounts and rent or watch the movie. It's so worth it. You guys will absolutely love it, and it's important. And you know what? We talked a lot about Johnny Mac. We also covered him on BCC episode number 16 with special guest Maria Thayer. If you want to hear more about Dr. John Mac's work. The early days, so don't be too judgmental. We were just sort of figuring things out. Yeah. But give it a listen.
Those are that was in the Michael really interrupts years.
Oh yeah, that was a classic Michael phase. We've come so far.
We got a little taste of it at the beginning of this episode.
You were excited.
Very excited.
You can follow me on Instagram. I'm at Peace Drone, and I'm also on Cameo. I'll sing you a song. It's a lot of fun. Maybe make a nice Valentine's Day. I'll sing a little romantic song. Who knows? I don't know.
What happens if they fall in love with you?
Sorry, I'm spoken for. But you can also check out a lot of music. It is a growing pile over on the Cosmeteer. There is a bunch of scores from the show. There is exclusive demos that I haven't released anywhere else of my own solo music. There's an entire album that I lost 7 years ago and just found 8 years
Loving
ago.
that album, by the way. I've been writing to it lately. Kicking
nice.
ass, dude. Love
it's
that
like ambient surf music. It's great.
for sure.
Great to chill / relax to.
Oh, yeah. You can have your own BCC Lo-Fi cafe. You can be your own BCC Lo-Fi girl.
While you're having a baby.
Or non-binary friend. Or you're having a baby. Great.
If anyone has a baby to my ambient music, please send me an email.
Don't you want your baby's ears, the first thing they hear is not the love of a mother or a father's cooing voices, but the ambient sounds of Riley Bray? Yeah. All right, we're headed over to the other side right now for a fun-sized story of high strangeness featuring a very creepy and obscure close encounter. If we don't see you there, we'll see you back here next Wednesday for an all-new episode of BCC. Until then, good night.
And go get regressed.
Is your flute?
Bigfoot Collectors Club is produced by Riley Bray and Michael McMillan and scored and engineered by Riley Bray. Our theme song, Come Alone, is by Suneaters, courtesy of Lotuspool Records. Do us a favor and support the show and unlock 3 bonus episodes every month by becoming a member of our Patreon, BCC The Other Side, which can be found at patreon.com/BigfootCollectorsClub.